Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's unprecedented press conference at number 6 Convent Place. It's my pleasure to welcome the Honourable Dr. Keith Asabaldi QC to number 6 Convent Place today for this unique press conference. Today, your Chief Minister and your Leader of the Opposition appear together probably for the first time since the 1960s. The issues we are dealing with today relate to matters of life and death. It's therefore right and proper that we should be standing shoulder to shoulder together on these issues. Today, I'm here to report to you on the discussions in the meeting of the Cabinet held this morning. This meeting was attended by the Leader of the Opposition. At the end of our statements, we will take questions. Both of us will be able to comment on the questions posed as may be appropriate. In that respect, I also want to start by welcoming to number 6 Convent Place the members of the press who've attended this press conference in person. We've missed you here for the past few weeks. Welcome to this unique event this afternoon. Before I go on to the matters that I must address you on, I want to share with you the updated statistics on the spread of coronavirus COVID-19 across our community. To date, the number of tests carried out have been 1,928. 36 results are pending. Of the 1,892 results received, the number of confirmed cases is a total of 132. Of those, the numbers of recovered cases is approximately 90% or 120. The number of active cases as at today remains 12. Those numbers are a measure of the success that we have achieved as a community in the government's policy of lockdown. For that, I want to thank everyone in Gibraltar for observing the regulations that we have imposed during the period of social lockdown to date. I must thank the over 70s in particular. You are the demographic most at risk, and you are the persons most severely affected by the lockdown regulations that we have imposed. You know that we're doing this for your benefit. But I do acknowledge, of course, that the rules infringe your hard-earned civil liberties. I want, therefore, to thank everyone who has been inconvenienced by the lockdown rules that we have imposed. The overwhelming tenor of the approach of the population has been respectful and supportive, and I want to thank each and every one of you personally for that. You have my assurance that we will not maintain these rules in place for a moment longer than is necessary. For now, the rules will remain in place, although we have started a process of modifying them in order to gradually release more activities. I will say more of that in a moment. I also want today to renew my thanks for the work being done by the public sector at this time. From our doctors, to our refuse collectors, to our teachers, to our nurses, our cleaners, the consultants, the intensivists, our community has cause to be grateful to you all. And that gratitude will have to continue for some months to come, because we will have to continue to check COVID-19's progress in coming months. For that reason, the Cabinet today met to consider the extension of the general social lockdown affecting all in our community. The lockdown regulations expire this Thursday on the 23rd of April, and a decision on whether or not to renew them must be made ahead of that date. Additionally, we also had an obligation to consider the lockdown rules applying to our over 70s, as we have committed that these will be reviewed every 7 days. The Cabinet heard this morning from all the heads of the agencies that are relevant to our decision-making in respect of the slowdown of coronavirus. The Acting Medical Director of the Gibraltar Health Authority, Dr. Krish Rawal, informed us of the continued state of readiness of the GHA. This included a review of the personal protective equipment available to all our GHA personnel, including our personnel at ERS. We have more than enough PPE in Gibraltar, and we will continue sourcing more. Additionally, we've reviewed the mechanisms being pursued at ERS by Antonio Marin and Susan Vallejo Baglietto. This has to date been a success story for which we must thank all our GHA, ERS and MEDOC personnel. We're similarly satisfied with the work being done in the domiciliary care sector, also where companies Ada and Rainbow continue to provide care to our elderly citizens in their homes. They too have taken great care to follow infection control procedures to avoid transmission of the coronavirus to our vulnerable elderly citizens. Dr. Rawal also informed us of the work being done in the laboratory at A&E, and the continued preparations in the Nightingale facility. For that reason, I can today announce that we will be exercising our Nightingale facility tomorrow as from 10 a.m. You should therefore not be alarmed if you see activity in that area of Gibraltar. Paul Alvang additionally advised that more ventilators are expected to arrive in coming days. This will make a total of 59 ventilators available in Gibraltar. We are all therefore satisfied that the GHA is prepared for a surge. That surge has not yet come, but it may, and we are ready for it. We were addressed by the Commissioner of Police on the enforcement of the lockdown regulations. The Commissioner confirmed that the general public has worked well with the Royal Gibraltar Police. As the weather improves, we call on each of you to continue your cooperative approach with the RGP and our law enforcement agencies, Her Majesty's Customs and the GDP. The Chief Secretary informed us in detail of the preparations which the public sector had undergone and the considerable work done across the board. Ivor Lopez, the Civil Contingencies Coordinator, and Samantha Sacramento, as the Minister for Civil Contingencies, confirmed Gibraltar's continued readiness to deal with the major incident I have declared. Of course, today, the key presentation was from the Director of Public Health. Dr. Sohail Bhatti informed the Cabinet of his analysis of the current rate of infection. The Director of Public Health believes that with the lockdown restrictions we have put in place, the rate of infection is now at R0.6. Additionally, our ability to carry out testing has grown greatly since the start of the pandemic. For that reason, we're going to roll out robust additional testing. The first will be testing of our frontline staff, not just in the GHA. This will include testing in all our enforcement agencies, our teachers, etc. This sample will be designed to show us if there is prevalence of the virus in our frontline staff. The deliberations of the Cabinet this morning continued for 3 hours. As a result, the daily meeting of Platinum Command has been delayed until 6 p.m. this evening after this press conference. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear fellow Gibraltarians, given all of the evidence that we have heard of the considerable slowing of the progress of the virus through our community, the Cabinet has this morning unanimously decided, with the agreement of the Leader of the Opposition, that the lockdown measures are working and must therefore continue. The regulations of general application will therefore be renewed on Thursday, which is the 23rd of this month. As I indicated last week, we have agreed that these regulations will be reviewed every 7 days also. In order to bring the relevant reviews into line with each other, the reviews will take place every Monday during the course of the regular rhythm of Cabinet meetings. If necessary, an ad hoc meeting of the Cabinet can obviously be convened if an urgent requirement comes up for consideration. But the conclusion is that there is light at the end of the tunnel. But the world into which we emerge from this tunnel may be very different to the one we used to inhabit before. The science on a vaccine and on medications is still very much in flux. We all hope for an effective vaccine, but nothing is certain. The thing that is clear is that the slowdown of the virus opens up the possibility that we can start to very slowly unlock also. We've therefore additionally agreed that the slowing of the virus has been effective enough for us to start to pursue a strategy to carefully, slowly, and prudently exit from lockdown. This will be complex and multifaceted, and you will each want and be required to know what you can and cannot do at various times. In order to ensure that we have such clarity and visibility of how the lockdown will end, we will endeavour during the course of this week to prepare a written exit plan for Gibraltar. This will be a very contingent document. There will be many moving parts to it, and it will almost inevitably change as matters progress. But we're going to publish a Gibraltar plan to exit from the various lockdowns. This will be a document developed by Task Force Restart and Recover and approved by the government. We will seek to approve this document at the next meeting of the Cabinet. And we have to be clear. The virus is still in our community, even though the confirmed numbers are low. So in order to start a phased process of releasing the lockdown, the Director of Public Health has advised that 4 conditions should first be met. The first condition is that the number of COVID-19 cases should be rising at less than 6 per day. That condition is currently met. The second condition is that the number of COVID-19 admissions to hospital should be less than 3 per day. and that condition is also currently met. The third condition is whether there are less than 2 cases of COVID-19 on ventilators in the intensive care unit. That condition, again, is currently met. And the fourth condition is whether there are more than 25% of cases in the over 70s. That condition is thankfully also currently met. These conditions are therefore all now met, and as a result we can consider starting a very gradual unlocking process. With those 4 conditions met, we're ready to implement first of all the opportunity for the over 70s to go out to exercise. That will be the first relief measure. But the over 70s will not be released from lockdown in coming weeks. It is very likely that if you're over 70, lockdown will in fact continue for many more weeks, and I want to be upfront about that with you now. We're imposing a lockdown for your own protection and for the protection of the resources of the GHA. Please understand that. I know you do. When you are out exercising, you must not stop and socialize, and you must always keep to the social distancing rules. The reason we're making an amendment to the regulations in coming days will be to enable you to go out to exercise, but this exception must not be used to avoid the rest of the spirit of the regulations affecting our over 70s. Remember that our main target in slowing the spread of COVID-19 is to save your lives. It is that stark and it is that simple. And our success to date is no guarantee of continued success. So when we announce the details of the mechanism for exercising, please go out and exercise, but do not socialize. Indeed, everyone must remember, whatever age you are, that when you are out exercising, you must not stop and socialize. You must always keep to the social distancing rules. So please, exercise, yes, socializing, no. The second relief measure that we will be able to implement as a result of meeting the 4 conditions set out by the Director of Public Health will be to allow more businesses to reopen, but with strict conditions. We will make a more detailed statement on that in coming days. We expect the permission for some businesses to start to reopen will be effective from the 1st of May. This will enable us to align the reopening of some businesses with the relevant dates for claims under the Beat COVID measures for businesses. For now, this week, everything will substantially stay the same, not least because many businesses have designated employees as inactive for the whole of the month of April. I also want to tell you that in preparing our assessment for a detailed plan for exit, we're looking at the details of what are being proposed in every relevant nation for every relevant sector. We want to return to normal ASAP, but it will be difficult to do safely. To an extent, this has never happened before. Therefore, there is no roadmap. There is no protocol to follow. There is no international standard to apply. We have to experiment. This is a process, and we do not have all the answers. No one does. But we are asking all the right questions to get to the right conclusions. We will only know in the future whether what we are going to do as we start to unlock is the best and right approach. And that doesn't stop us wanting to unlock as quickly and as safely as possible. But that does mean that you will have to bear with us. We will try things and perhaps have to resolve from them. We may have to change things that we embark on. We may need to do things that are counterintuitive. But what we are doing is for our common good. Please bear with us. And insofar as we are able, we will give you clarity of decisions and clarity of direction of travel. Today we're talking about good news in Gibraltar, but we're seeing great pain on our television screens and in our newspapers for families in other nations. I want to express once again our nation's solidarity with the people of the United Kingdom, Spain and Morocco, and with all nations in the world that have lost citizens to COVID-19. The most painful scenes we have witnessed in the UK, Spain and Italy, which are the nations we may have seen most of on our television screens, are the scenes of people dying alone. Relatives seeing loved ones pass without being able to be close to them. That is what we do not want for our people here. That is what we are working so hard to avoid. My dear fellow Gibraltarians, everything we have done to protect lives, to ensure the safety and security of our people. Because of the extraordinary powers we have taken, we have worked more closely with the opposition than ever before. And on that note, I want to thank the Leader of the Opposition and his parliamentary colleagues for allowing us the space to work with outside the normal rhythm of politics. In this war, we have been moments away from a government of national unity. We have been able to avoid that to date. But I will not hesitate to convene such a government if I have to. Not to consolidate power in my hands any further, but to ensure that all the powers of the government are channeled exclusively to the protection of our people. It has not yet been necessary to do so, and it may be that the threat of that is receding. But in my judgment, it was right that I should invite the opposition to work alongside us on these issues. I genuinely believe this level of cooperation at this time is what our people required of us. We're keeping party politics and political egos out of this. We're looking out first and foremost for the interests of our people, and that is what we are, in fact, elected to do. To look after the safety and security of our people above all else. They would expect no less of us. When we first took our faltering steps together in politics in 1991, Damon Bocino, Keith Asobaldi, Joseph Garcia, and Fabian Picaldo were committing themselves to work for Gibraltar and its people. Today, almost 30 years later, by working together, we are working best for Gibraltar and its people. And I believe that Keith has fully understood that. Both he and Mr. Feetham have been ministers and both understand the remarkable ability of government to act and to react, and also the limits of that ability. I therefore thank the GSD for the approach they've taken, in particular to the beat COVID measures and the emergency budget measures on which we have worked also with Mr. Clinton. Having said that, of course, we all want democracy to continue on the basis of a Westminster system. That will mean a return to adversarial mechanisms of parliamentary accountability. I expect Parliament may be able to return in late May or in June. I do hope that when we return, our exchanges will be no less robust than in the past. But I do believe that they will also be likely much less personalised. In fact, I do hope that we have fixed forever some of the personalised nature of the debate. As we move forward, we have a chance to do something very positive in the political fray, as we do in all areas of post-pandemic life in Gibraltar. I think it is important as we go forward that we should take the opportunity we have to deliver to Gibraltar a highly functioning democracy that leaves behind it the more personalised aspects of the debate. For now, let us not underestimate the hard work and effort that lies ahead. We have achieved our first objective. We have slowed the virus. We have protected our GHA, but we have a long road still to travel. We will be free of the virus, and then we will all smile again. It's now my unusual pleasure to invite the Leader of the Opposition to make his own statement before we open ourselves to questions from the members of the press who are here in person and from those who have sent their questions in. Keith.
Thank you, Fabian. The crisis we are dealing with has swept the globe in a dramatic fashion. At first, it was difficult to shrug off the temptation of viewing those scenes in January of the Wuhan lockdown as a faraway problem. The way it has cascaded from country to country has required the most radical of action and has changed how we used to live our lives, what we have been accustomed to. The predictions by public health experts of the consequences of inaction were dire. The virus has intruded into everything we called normal and sent shockwaves through the world economy. This unprecedented backdrop is why I am here today alongside the Chief Minister. We are your elected opposition, and we take our role seriously. We have very firm views of how Gibraltar should be governed, and we've got our differences, sometimes stark, with the government. But I have always also said that we stand ready to work with the government at a time of national crisis in the public interest. And this is undeniably such a time. The Chief Minister first briefed me in detail about the level of the potential crisis on the 13th of March, a late Friday evening after the Commonwealth Bank holiday weekend. The information he shared with me then of the public health modelling and scientific advice the government had received left me in no doubt that Gibraltar was facing a major public health crisis. He asked the opposition to consider suspending the normal rules of politics and that Parliament should meet to pass emergency COVID measures only. I convened a meeting of the Shadow Cabinet for the next day, Saturday morning, where we unanimously agreed to support the government in this crisis and take steps to assist in the effort. I'm grateful for the support of my colleagues in the opposition during all our discussions, as well as their specific work and input on individual measures during the last few weeks. There are opposition parties in other countries who are simply standing by, either only conducting a critical campaign or not being involved in proactive engagement. But when we got to that particular crossroads, it was clear to us which path we should take here. This is the time for political courage, to do the hard things and take the hard decisions together for the greater good of our people. The magnitude of the challenge we were called upon to make, when we were called upon to make that choice, had the potential to affect many lives, as well as to destabilize our way of life. We were and remain clear that it is the time to work together to get us through all this. It's the time to jointly ensure Gibraltar's economic and social sustainability while we also protect lives. A strong opposition is one that recognizes the need to work together and has the courage to do so effectively, at the same time retaining its political integrity and continuing to ask the tough questions that our community requires at this critical time. Since then, we have been working closely with government, and I've been in almost daily contact with the Chief Minister. We supported an emergency budget on the 20th of March to provide government with an extra tranche of funding for a further 6 months to allow it to concentrate on the COVID crisis. I've attended special sessions of the Cabinet on a number of occasions to provide opposition input into decision-making directly. We've discussed the immediacy of public health and emergency economic measures. All my opposition colleagues, without exception, have provided input on the various measures. On the BEAT package of measures, Roy Clinton and Danny Feetham have worked on particular amendments directly with government. Roy continues to work with the Financial Secretary on technical issues on economic measures. Elliot Phillips, our Shadow Health Minister, has attended public health briefings with me. Damon Bossino, who has shadow responsibilities for important sectors of the economy, such as tourism, the port and financial services, has been in direct contact with the ministers he shadows, and I expect him to work with Task Force Future as we go forward. Edwin Reyes was instrumental in shaping our opposition view on school closures very early on, and together with Elliot Phillips has publicly made clear our position on the provision of online education in the meantime. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank ministers for the constructive way they have engaged with us so far. And when we get through this crisis, as Fabian says, I hope it will lead to a more constructive climate for politics in future. We take the view, certainly, that we are all in this together, and we will continue to work together to get Gibraltar through this crisis. Having said that, we are also conscious of our constitutional role as your elected opposition. This has informed the rigorous debate at our various meetings, and why we have, on occasion, spoken publicly on issues where perhaps our private lobbying has made less headway. But in doing so, we have retained a constructive tone and intent which will mark our attitude throughout this crisis. We will continue to do so. This way, we will be most effective in your interest. The spread of the virus has been so frenetic in many places, and the measures so significant in terms of how it has transformed how we do things, that it is hard to believe that the actual time frame has been relatively short. It was only on the 3rd of March, 40 days ago, that we reported our first positive case of COVID-19 in Gibraltar. Indeed, it is important to bear in mind that when the first measures were taken to close bars on that Friday evening of our first briefing on the 13th of March, we had no active positive confirmed cases in Gibraltar. By the time of the general social lockdown, we had 15 cases, but the rate of growth in the first couple of weeks after the 16th of March was significant, with a 500% increase up to the 23rd of March and a further 460% increase in the week up to the 30th of March. At that stage, the active cases were 3 times more than the recovered cases. By the end of the second full week of the social lockdown, this had fallen to an increase of 163%. And the numbers of confirmed cases have now fallen further still in the last 2 weeks to less than 15% and 5%, respectively, in the last week. The number of confirmed active cases is now smaller than it has been for a month. That means the measures that have been taken so far are working, but we are not out of the woods yet. The decision today to extend the social lockdown has been taken on the basis of public health advice and for good reason. The period ahead is still critical. It's important not to lift restrictions too early, however much we want those to go away. If we act too quickly, there could be a second wave. And it is important to remember that the fires that have raged in each country started with just one spark. The numbers of cases we now see in the UK, the US, Spain or Italy all started with one individual case. And this is a virus that circulates among us without being seen and sometimes without symptoms. On the 13th of March we had no active cases, and yet the numbers steadily increased. Had it not been for the lockdown, we could have had many hundreds of cases. Equally, there will still be cases undetected in the community, so we need to wait for the possible incubation periods to pass to have a real sense of where we are. And we need to combine this with vigorous testing to have a more comprehensive statistical platform to take decisions. Armed with that knowledge, over the next couple of weeks, it will be easier to take more wide-ranging decisions. Having said that, I believe the public health backdrop makes it possible to keep restrictions under review and gradually lifted as we go forward in coming weeks and months. The current situation is globally unsustainable and would bring economic collapse as well as a number of social or mental well-being problems in its wake, were it to continue unchanged for months. There will likely be changes across Europe in coming weeks. The driver for change here will be our success on the public health front. We agree that Gibraltar could aim to start easing some restrictions very soon and from May, as long as the scientific and public health advice on the statistical trends is supportive. There are possible freedoms that could be restored gently, or measures that could carefully be taken, and I've exchanged views on this with the Chief Minister. I know this is under active consideration by the Cabinet, some of which happened this morning, and the decision will ultimately be for the government. And whether it is possible will very much also depend on how we all, each of us, follow current guidelines. The more we all respect these, the quicker we will emerge. So we are supportive in the opposition of the decisions being announced today that the first tier of greater liberalisation should allow over 70s to exercise within a safe framework to be announced soon, and for some businesses to be able to reopen under conditions that preserve social distancing. But even after some liberalisation, we must remain vigilant, as we may need to reimpose restrictions if there is a renewed and significant spike in cases. We will work with the government in planning for gradual exit from these measures. It's also important for there to be clarity of the principles that would govern any exit strategy and how these principles would be applied. High on the list of principles will be an assessment of the public health state of play, resources, and comprehensive and robust testing. High on the list of how these will be applied will be the need to gradually bring back individual and commercial freedom while protecting lives. While the time to set that out in detail may not be today, a clear explanation of those principles and how they will be applied to individuals and business should happen very soon. And of course, in the context of our own strategy, we must inevitably also consider the state of the outbreak across the frontier in Spain, given that the virus knows no borders. And so we also welcome the Chief Minister's commitment today to publish a clear roadmap of the way forward, subject, of course, to the dynamic need to change as we go forward. I know that there has been tremendous discipline by everyone, and I want to thank the public at large for their wide-scale respect and adherence to the rules. We don't lose sight of the frustration there may be in some quarters with some aspects of these controls, and of course we would like to see these go as soon as possible. But if these are there, they are there to save lives. For a sustained period, there may need to be a degree of controls in different sectors and on the more vulnerable. And we will need to do things differently, whether it is interacting socially or working differently. Equally, we're aware that some of the economic measures are not assisting everyone, and we must find a way to bring a wider pool of people suffering economic consequences into the net. In parallel with any lifting of restrictions, we need to jumpstart the economy in a safe and enduring way. That may break the traditional plea for fiscal prudence that we have stood for, but these are extraordinary times. I also want to take this opportunity on behalf of all my opposition colleagues and myself of thanking healthcare workers, the essential services, civil servants, teachers, and the many agencies all working together to keep Gibraltar safe and prepared for any crisis. There has been an incredible collective effort by so many people, which we are tremendously grateful for. Gibraltar can be proud of many things. We have so far done extraordinarily well, but there is no guarantee that this will continue. I hope that in years to come we can look back on this period and reflect on the way we dealt with this crisis, that we came together as a people in the same way we have done at other seminal moments in our history. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Keith. We now turn to questions from the media. I'm going to take first a question from YGTV who are not here.
Good afternoon. A question from Dr. Asopardi. How do you balance the opposition's duty to scrutinise the government's policy decisions with the desire to remain united in a national emergency, where disagreements can come across as attempts to seek political advantage?
I mean, I have to say I've not found it that difficult to square that circle. What we do is we provide input on an unsolicited basis. Often I'll get in contact with Fabian with some particular idea or thought that we have. We exchange views in a constructive way. We respond constructively to consultation when our views are specifically sought on ideas or measures that are being drafted. But clearly, sometimes the government may take a decision behind closed doors which we do not completely share. We may express a view that is different. There is then a judgment call for us as to whether it is a difference that is fundamental, that is so fundamental in nature that we should raise it publicly or not. There have been times in the more recently where I have felt, and I've said so publicly, and I said so today, that perhaps I did not feel that our ideas were being taken on board as quickly as we would have wanted, and therefore we have either issued press releases or taken to social media to promote and lobby for specific changes. We've done so in a constructive way. I think it has been taken constructively by government. So yes, it is a balancing exercise for us to retain our constitutional role. Fabian has spoken about his view that if we got to a specific moment which we all do not want to arrive in Gibraltar, there might be a need for a national unity government. We have not had any discussions in any level of detail in relation to that before any of that happens, and we do not want that to happen because it would be a very serious moment in Gibraltar's history for that to have to even be contemplated. Before that happens, we are working constructively in a very progressive way with the government, but also keeping in mind our constitutional role that requires us to robustly test the government's policy, and we are doing so first. I believe it is our duty to do so privately, and then sometimes we do so publicly where the need arises.
A second question from YGTV for Dr. Sabardi. A month ago, the GST said the government needed to roll out a, quote, systematic and comprehensive testing policy of people presenting COVID-19 type symptoms on a far wider scale than it has previously. Is your party now satisfied that this has been achieved?
So we issued that press release. In fact, I had a look at it the other day because in the context of how time passes, we issued that press release on the 11th of March, which was 2 days before we started having more cooperative discussions and very detailed briefings. I think since that has happened, the level of testing has been upped significantly. You just have to compare when we made that statement on the 11th of March, where there had probably been less than 200 tests conducted, and where we are today. The government has also taken on board our views, communicated to them in relation to random testing, where I discussed that issue at length with the Chief Minister, and they did a first round of random testing, and I certainly welcome the fact that they're going to do further rounds of random testing. I believe that robust and comprehensive testing is the way forward, because if you're going to release and liberalize some of these measures, you can only do so from a sound basis of information and knowledge. And by doing continuous testing, even though, of course, there are question marks about some of the because when you do a test, of course, it doesn't mean that the person doesn't get it the next day. So it's not entirely 100% a guarantee of a snapshot, but it does provide a snapshot of the community at the particular moment. And I do think that the testing picture gives us comfort, certainly since we made those original comments, but we will, from our opposition standpoint, remain advocates of that and lobby the government. We will continue to lobby for that testing program to be vigorous. I believe, from the discussions that I have participated in, that the government are aware and fully seized of the need for there to be vigorous testing.
Thank you. If I can just comment on both those questions. I think working together has been as easy as it has been difficult. You know, when you've known each other for almost 30 years, it is easy to communicate, and it is easy to try and find the right way forward if you're looking for consensus. But it is also difficult because we have to remember the positions in which the people of Gibraltar have put us, and those in an adversarial system do require us to check each other. But I think the moment is sufficiently serious that I think we're doing that in a different way. And in terms of the testing, so if you look at the position on the 11th of March, with about 200 tests done, but not many swabs in Gibraltar, and not the ability to do the testing in the laboratory in Gibraltar, we've now moved to approximately 10 times the tests done in those 4 weeks or so. We've got a lot more swabs available in Gibraltar. We have the reagent in Gibraltar and the ability to test here. So one thing is what we want to do, and one other thing is what we can do. And I think there is now an understanding that we are cutting our testing cloth to fit what we can do, and that is now a lot more than we were able to do in the past. So on to the next question from GBC.
Thank you. Mr. Picardo, you said that you are looking to reopen some businesses under strict conditions as from the 1st of May. Now, I know you said you didn't want to give any details, but can I ask you what sort of mindset you have when you refer to businesses? Are you talking about retail outlets? Are you talking about offices? What level are you pitching this at?
So I think you have to be mindful of what the rules do not allow and what the rules allow today. So our offices are still open with a recommendation that people should work from home insofar as is possible. So teleworking is very likely to form an important part of the future. We're not recommending that anybody should go back to an office, but we are looking at the sectors where we have imposed a lockdown, and that includes in particular the retail sector, ship repair, ship building and construction. And we need to calibrate how we bring those back. There's a lot of economic activity there. Nothing is going to be as important as preserving life and protecting life, but economic activity is an important part of how we fund our health service. So we have to get that balance right. And so what we're looking at trying to do is to see what parts of the retail sector we can bring back and how, which parts of the construction sector we can bring back and how and when. All of this is going to be very trial and error. We have to get this absolutely right. We need to perhaps even create avenues for people to access their place of work without being in the general population. We have a very large population that comes into work in Gibraltar from across the frontier. We need to ensure that we are monitoring how the disease may come through the frontier into Gibraltar, not at the frontier, because that would create bottlenecks. I think that's going to be important data, not just for us, but also for our neighbours. The effort which is being made in Spain is not dissimilar to the effort that is being made in Gibraltar and in other countries in the world and in Europe. So we're going to need to look at this as a jigsaw that we bring together, but trying to bring back an element of economic activity. The other side of the coin, of course, is that if we were to reopen the whole of Main Street's retail activity today, it would probably look a little bit like Main Street used to look in the closed frontier days, because there's not going to be much touristic activity to speak of. Therefore, we're talking about making retail available to the general population in Gibraltar. And I think that's also going to be an important part of how we bring normality back to our lives, the ability to access shops, even if we don't go out to the shops, but at least we find it easier for the shopkeeper to access a shop to bring us something to the home. So, as I say, I think the Gibraltar into which we emerge at the end of this process is different to the Gibraltar that we knew as we went into it, certainly in the short term. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I just add this, that I think it was important today for there to be the principal decision taken that we would move towards some liberalisation of the commercial freedoms and allow some businesses to open. I think we need to have a detailed discussion how this is going to work, the mechanics, and it's fraught with difficulty. And we also, I think, need to take a snapshot of what that business community is that is under lockdown, as it were, because I think it is possible, and I've had a first discussion with Fabian about this, but it's a matter that requires much more discussion. But it is possible, I believe, for there to be an almost classification, categorization of the various businesses under lockdown, because some of them might be more amenable to social distancing and others are active in industries which are much more complicated if you want to apply social distancing. It's very clear that is the case. The other thing that I think we need to take account of is that while it is welcome that we're taking this decision in principle, and that we are still against a very uncertain backdrop, because one of the things that was said when the EU published their guidelines only very recently on lockdown and how to go forward is that even when under containment, the virus spreads. So you're in an uncertain backdrop. So when you liberalize, you're still testing the water. So you've got to provide buffer periods to see where the community is going. And again, when you are liberalizing the business community, the worst thing that could happen probably is that you reopen certain businesses that would suffer under a reimposition of further restrictions that others would not. So you've got to also factor into the discussion which businesses are more flexible and would be amenable to the reimposition of restrictions if indeed we ever came to that position, although of course we don't want to.
Can I pick up on that point? Because you were talking earlier, Chief Minister, about the 4 conditions that Dr. Batty had said had to be met before any relaxation of the lockdown rules could be envisaged and considered. And those 4 conditions are met right now, which is why you're looking at this issue. But of course, as soon as you start to release, particularly when Spain releases in tandem and you start getting that cross-border flow again, you may well see those conditions not being met. So presumably what you're looking at is loosening, tightening, loosening, tightening. Is that correct?
Well, potentially that is what we may be faced with, but we would not like to find ourselves in that situation. It may indeed be that this is the situation that the whole world finds itself in as we go forward. If it were possible, we would wish to be able to reopen and not have to emerge again into lockdown, but that may not be the possibility. Can I just tell you this, though? In relation to the conditions, the 4 conditions that we discussed this morning from a Director of Public Health point of view, those are the conditions to start the process for gradual unlock. It's not that those are the same triggers that would bring you straight back to lockdown. So different triggers brought us into a lockdown. Different triggers might bring us to start to do different things. Remember that we're not going to move to a complete freedom position. We're going to be moving levers, and therefore we might say, well, one of the conditions relates to the prevalence of the disease in the over 70-year-olds. That, if it starts to happen, may lead to once again a tighter position in respect of the over 70s, which may not have an effect in respect of retail businesses and other sectors. So I think this is, as I said, a lot of moving parts, and each of them will have a role to play in the context of how we calibrate things going forward. The formula to start relaxing is not the same formula to start moving back. That still requires an element of understanding. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's an important point to bear in mind, and because I certainly, we welcome that the public health director should give thought to a specific medical criteria beyond which we can then think about liberalisation of these measures. But it's important for that not to be overly applied in a sort of rigid way. I think that's important, especially because it's about admissions into hospital, and it's a handful of cases or percentages. And when you can have one or two cases that might arise, that might skew the percentages, and then suddenly there's some kind of technical view of whether those conditions were indeed breached. So it's important to view these conditions as something that has been applied by the public health director today with a view to advising the government and in our participation from the opposition as to whether there is a case, a public health case for lifting the lockdown gradually. That is important because this should be driven by public health advice first. We are beyond that point very clearly, and therefore we can get to the stage where there should be some degree of lifting of the restrictions, but it's then important to look at, and this is why we say, and so has the Chief Minister, talked about an exit strategy document. I think it's that document that should have an accompanying narrative that should explain how the government's going to approach these things as a matter of principle, and how those principles will then be applied, and it's that document that should govern how future restrictions, if they are needed, are reimposed, albeit that document also needs to be dynamic and respond to evolving circumstances at the time.
Yes, you both made mention to the Parliament. Mr. Picardo says normal realm of politics, and you yourself mentioned it as well, Mr. Sparley. Now, most people are approving of course, of the government and opposition working together, and there's no shadow of a doubt about that. But do you agree that democracy is being undermined by the, this pandemic politics? Where mostly the working of the government has been done behind closed doors, and the public are getting to know what's happening really in these press briefings, and should the return of normal politics, I mean by that parliamentary politics, be on the same par as the different stages of the lockdown is unfolded? I mean, meaning June, July, August, whenever. That's the end of it. So I mean, should that be the case?
Well, I think that the government is doing more in the open than it has ever done before. It is hugely stressful for ministers to ensure that every day at 4 p.m. they are in front of the public to explain everything that has happened in the past 24 hours and provide the statistics in a way that is going to be understood, in a way that is meaningful, and in a way that is explained, sometimes very complex science, explained in a way that is understood. So I don't think that we're doing more behind closed doors. Where the doors are closed and we are working with the opposition, then we are working with the representatives of the public who with the government, who are also the representatives of the public, are coming together to make decisions which we've been empowered to make by the people in a general election. So I think this is actually a very successful exercise in the positive nature of politics coming to the fore for the benefit of the general public in the public interest, which is at the end of the day what we're elected to do. But if you think of what it is that we are talking about in substance, what is a government for? A government is there for the benefit of the people who elect it. It's not there to entertain the public with Punch and Judy politics, although that has been an element of what has become normalized in Western parliamentary democracies, that part of the evening's entertainment is to hear what one politician has said about the other. I think that is suspended at the moment. I hope that when we come back to the challenge of ideas, which is what politics is essentially about, and I would expect that we will be able to come back, as I said during the course of my first intervention, I think, towards the end of May and June, where we will come back to parliamentary politics, but I hope a much less personalised parliamentary politics, which will enable us to continue a testing of ideas without falling into the trap of personalisation, which, although may be part of what the gladiatorial contest that people look forward to has been the politics of recent past, is not what I think is in order at the moment. When I say we're going to emerge into a different sort of Gibraltar, I've already said a lot about what I think that means. I think it means a lot in particular for the political class, myself included.
If you don't mind, I'm going to start my answer in this way. I gave my contribution to the Gibraltar Talk series last year. It was on the subject of the importance of positivity, and I think much of what we call as normal politics is so deeply negative, unfortunately, and it's something that I resile from. It's not the way that I would like politics to be conducted. I've spoken very often about this. What brought me into politics was the ability and the desire to make changes where I thought that things were operating wrongly, and the importance of doing so in a positive way and contributing to the development of this community in a significant way where you leave a mark which is a positive mark. So I don't decry the fact that we are working together. It's unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, of course it's necessary when you're working together on a serious crisis that the blow-by-blow account doesn't always happen completely in the public, that cooperation sometimes requires you to sit behind closed doors and work together. I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. I do think we are going to, I said slightly in jest the other day in my interview that I hanker after those days where we can have the luxury of focusing on our disagreements. I only half jest about that, because I certainly don't hanker after those negative days where we sit in Parliament slinging things at each other. Is that going to happen once we go back to politics? Well, it may do, because humans have a tremendous ability of falling on a number of occasions over the same stone, as the Spanish saying would go. But I would certainly hope that we learn the lesson of more positive politics. I think there is scope for doing things together in a more proactive, constructive way, even where we disagree. And of course we're going to disagree with the government when we go back to normal, because they believe in certain things. We may believe that our approach is slightly different in others. And but I think that there is an important distinction to make between normality and abnormality. And we are in a very abnormal situation, which requires unprecedented action. And the fact that we sit down together and work together as government and opposition means that I think we have a mature democracy that allows us to do that. You see so many examples out there worldwide where governments and oppositions have been unable to do that.
I don't think anybody will be disappointed to see us beat our microphones and political daggers into plowshares for the benefit of our people.
Fabian, can I ask you about the situation with the Gibraltarian cars being reported by GBC that are being impounded in Spain with fines of up to 17,000 euros reported. Is there anything you can do about this, or is this completely in the hands of Spain? I mean, you have been in touch with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Spain. I mean, could you do something, because there was no prior warning to this action?
So I think it's important that we understand that the government of Gibraltar cannot condone activity which is contrary to Spanish law. And Spanish law provides that if you are a resident of Spain, then you cannot be in possession of a vehicle which is not a registered Spanish vehicle. Those are the laws of Spain. You say there was no warning. Those have been the laws in Spain for over 20 or 30 years since the imposition of VAT. So I think what this pandemic has brought about is the spotlight of clarity on people's legal status, where they live and where they pretend to live. And I fully understand that people have lived with the benefit of a very fluid situation. When the music has stopped, people have been left holding the baby that they are responsible for. In the context of our beat COVID measures, I know that many people who have been working illegally in our economy without having registered themselves are now kicking themselves because they're not going to get the benefit of those beat COVID payments. But look, if you are contributing your PAYE and your social insurance, when the music stops, you get the benefit of your payments. If you're registered as living in Spain, but you are not following the rules required of those who live in Spain, the government of Gibraltar cannot do anything to help you to undo the provisions of Spanish law, though I'm hugely sympathetic if somebody has been caught out inadvertently in that respect.
I mean, the only thing I'd say on that is, obviously, I've seen the story today, breaking today, on that, and yes, I mean, as Fabian says, clearly there may be laws in other countries that don't allow you to drive a Gibraltar registered car or a foreign plated car in Spain. And it does put the spotlight into the particular application of laws. All I would say, I guess, is that I'd draw the distinction that at a time of pandemic, yes, it does bring that spotlight to bear on particular issues, but I do note the marked distinction between, I mean, one of the things that struck me with hearing Commissioner McGrail on a couple of occasions now talk about enforcement is that the RGP are always trying to enforce with good humour first. And I think that's important at a time like this, and I contrast that attitude perhaps with a slightly different one in other countries. But I certainly welcome moving away from the scope of cars now. I certainly welcome that in the application of the beat measures locally, those measures are going to go to assist workers who have been registered, and that it is bringing to the fore an element of unregistered labour who will not be able to benefit from those payments. And that is certainly a good thing for the exchequer, for the treasury, for the taxpayer, because it will be limited, and it also, I think, does what we have always wanted for some time now, for us to ensure that the labour that works in Gibraltar is indeed registered.
Probably the best labour inspector we've ever had for the COVID measures. Jonathan?
Mr. Azzopardi, in the process of working closer with the government in this process, have you signed any confidentiality agreements?
No, because I think, we are political opponents, but as Fabian says, we've known each other for 30 years, and we know each other's boundaries, and we know that we can cooperate with each other in a business-like manner. And, I respect intensely the confidentiality of discussions we have had. I'm very careful about not breaching that. I will only comment publicly on an issue where it has already been put in the public domain by ministers. If I've been privy to a discussion of cabinet, even though I am not bound constitutionally by the collective responsibility of the cabinet, because there's nothing that says that I'm bound by it, but if I'm participating in those discussions, I'm very careful not to breach that confidentiality, and I understand that, and I've served in government, so I certainly wouldn't put a government that I was working with, if we in the opposition that I lead are going to answer the invitation of the government that the situation in Gibraltar is bad enough, serious enough for us to want to cooperate constructively in the national interests, I'm certainly not going to breach that invitation by a lack of confidentiality out there.
Thank you. I think that actually, as Keith says, knowing each other for 30 years means that you also have an element of trust, whether that is manifest in the day-to-day cut and thrust or not. We can certainly at all stages talk to each other, even when the political debate has been at a different tone. We've still been able to talk to each other behind the speaker's chair or directly on the phone. But I think you need to understand the situation in which we're in at the moment. This is not a situation where we're dealing with matters of state in the usual way. In other words, this is not about the interplay of the interests of the people of Gibraltar versus the interplay of the people of another state. The Gibraltar Consultative Council, which was created for that purpose when Keith was not in politics, and I asked him to draft that in the context of his professional advice to the government, provides for those provisions which he drafted for confidentiality, undertakings, etc. Because there you're dealing with issues of state. Here you're dealing with something completely different. These are matters of life and death of Gibraltarians. The decisions that we are taking are about whether we do X to save more lives or whether we do Y to save more lives. And can we agree that this is the best thing to do? And so therefore, I don't think that I would need to ask any Gibraltarian, let alone the leader of the opposition, to sign up to confidentiality in the context of these matters. It's a very different picture that you're seeing here today to the picture you might have seen with Sir Joshua Hassan and Peter Isola. Those were matters of state. These are matters of life and death.
I'd like to pick up on the whole lockdown issue and the release from it. For a long time, we've been told that a surge is inevitable, but I certainly have detected in the last couple of weeks that the language is slightly different. We're now talking about a surge may come, if it might come, basically. That's the phrase that you used today. And I'm just wondering whether you can tell us a little bit about what the health experts are telling you and how you understand that. And I'd be interested in your view as well on this, Mr. Asobardi, as to whether it's just simply the lockdown measures or whether there are other factors at play. Is there anything else that is feeding into your analysis as a possibility of what might be driving that very low rate of infection of, I think you mentioned an R0 of 0.6? So basically, it's receding essentially.
Yes.
So I mean, is that just purely the lockdown, or are there other factors? That
So the analysis that we have from the Director of Public Health is that the overwhelming factor here has been the lockdown. So as you separate people from each other, you separate them from the ability to receive the virus from others, and therefore the virus is not able to be transmitted in the way it would if we were living our ordinary lives. Now, in doing that, what we appear to have caught is what the Director of Public Health explained to us this morning was not the first wave of the virus, which would have led to a surge, but what he is calling wave zero. In other words, we appear to have caught a cluster and controlled that cluster very quickly by not giving the cluster the ability to become transmitted more widely. Now, in doing so, look, everybody is reading about what the virus is doing elsewhere. In doing so, we may have therefore completely flattened the curve in the context of infections and the need for hospitalization. The key question then, of course, is what comes next? Does this mean that we are more susceptible in future? Well, you may also have seen that there was this concept of herd immunity that suggested that if people caught the virus, that would immunize a large part of the population pending the arrival of the vaccine, and you would have the herd immunity effect. Today, we're being told there may be no such thing as herd immunity in a valuable way in relation to this virus because the immunity may only last 6 to 12 months, which means you would be doing this every year. The virus is new, it's not understood, and therefore the science is evolving and the advice based on the science is evolving. What we're seeing, therefore, is, as far as we understand, the effect of a lockdown. And I think we also have to bear in mind that in the same way that we talk about the potential for the virus to walk across our frontier in future, we're also seeing the effect of the opposite, that the lockdown in Spain is stopping in great measure the arrival of the virus in Gibraltar today. And that has given a result which was an unexpected result. When we were told to expect a surge, we haven't seen a surge. But of course, at any time, whilst there is one instance of the virus, as there was some months ago, no longer than that, in Southeast Asia, that could manifest in infection and could manifest in a surge. So we have to say that a surge may come. Indeed, whilst there is one person infected in Gibraltar who potentially is asymptomatic, we could still see a surge in future. But it is all about the reproductive ability of the virus and its ability to be caught by others who are put in the way of the virus. So the lockdown is the key thing. The vaccine may or may not come. You may have seen yesterday the interview given by one particular vaccinologist on the Andrew Marr show on the BBC about the opportunities for a vaccine, but also the limits of a vaccine. Antiviral drugs, that is to say medicine to treat the virus, may come. I think for us the best result is to keep numbers down until we have some clarity on vaccine, medication, etc. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just on that last point, and then I'll go back to Brian's original question. It's always important to bear in mind that we can't eradicate this virus because we in Gibraltar certainly can't do that. And all it will require is one asymptomatic case in 3 months' time to be in the community, and then it'll spread again. And so we've got to be careful how we do things. But what we're seeing today is in some ways a typical case of the effect of a lockdown, because all the literature that we've read and everyone's been involved in this has been poring over intensely over every single article and literature, that scientific or otherwise, an analysis that has been produced, was that if you had a general social lockdown, the real effect of the social lockdown would happen 2 weeks after that social lockdown. And we had social lockdown on the 23rd of March, and the 2 weeks were up on the 7th of April. And when you compare those percentages that I gave in my introductory remarks with the percentages in the following 2 weeks, you've got massively different figures. And that's because people, and it's also due to the fact that people in Gibraltar have respected locally those guidelines and the messaging that has been put out to the public information tremendously. And that cooperation has helped a lot in keeping those numbers down. Then whenever anyone's been tested positive, they have also respected in self-isolation those particular requirements. By doing all that, those cases have gone the other way. That permits us to restore individual and commercial freedoms. But in restoring individual and commercial freedoms, it's important to bear in mind that there is a danger, and that's why you've got to test waters, that there is a danger of it coming back at some point. And in a small place like Gibraltar, which is a small container of human life, then it can spread relatively quickly. So we need to guard against it. And it's not just a response to the Gibraltar lockdown. It's also a response to the wider regional, European, and global lockdown. One of the statistics that struck me that was given in one of the press conferences last week was that that ordinarily you would have had 33,000 persons a day crossing the frontier, and now it's down to about 2,000. Well, that gives you an element of understanding and you look at the passenger numbers arriving by air, and it's almost like nothing. So it does give you an understanding that regional, global, European lockdown, together combined with our own lockdown, is having that effect. And that effect is happening in each country. When other countries are talking about raising the restrictions as from May or June or whenever, it's because they have imposed their own lockdowns. And we all, in the global community, will need to be careful, short of arriving at a point when someone says to us, this is a vaccine that works, because there's even literature about that, short of that we will need to be very careful how we proceed in each country.
Fabian, You spoke about this problem with immunity, and do you think that it's possible, and I think John Cortes mentioned this yesterday, that coronavirus could become like an endemic situation which is prevalent at all times, and therefore vulnerable people have to take a lot more care. And in that context, I suppose elderly people having exercise was going to be more of a problem for them if they do meet and therefore inadvertently socialize with other people. No?
So everything is in the realms of the possible at the moment because we don't know enough about what's going to happen in coming months. But if that is a possible situation, the vulnerable may find themselves more permanently exposed. The elderly may consistently be in the vulnerable class. And how we ensure that we deal with that going forward if coronavirus, COVID-19, becomes a part of our lives in the background, we'll look at a much less pleasant world in the future. But I think we have to learn to live with it. I do hope that science will give us a more realistic way out than simply asking us to live with COVID-19. But we have abused the planet considerably. Pollution is something that we do ourselves, and we have to understand the world in which we are looking to bequeath to our children may not be the world that was bequeathed to us, and that's not exactly entirely something that we are each blameless for.
All I'd say is I think there's lots of stunningly intelligent people out there, and we in the scientific community, and we put our trust that hopefully someone will come up with a vaccine that actually works and delivers long-term immunity, and not just maybe 6-month or 12-month immunity that is what is being talked about. And yes, we take on board that point, and it's clear that I think the message from everyone, government and opposition, is that vulnerable sectors will need to have special protections going forward at the moment, because the current global panorama is not such that can deliver any degree of guarantee to their safety. But that does not mean that we are in a situation in Gibraltar where some restrictions cannot be liberalized, because it is also important to bear in mind that when you can't ask people to remain at home in lockdown forever, certainly not when you've got a backdrop, a public health backdrop, which is the case today, where the public health experts are saying that it is justifiable to consider lifting certain restrictions in a gradual and careful way, because their public health advice equally is that it is good for the mental well-being and physical health of the vulnerable sector to at least exercise for that hour a day or whatever it is, that framework of measures that is put in place for the over 70s. So it's a question of balance and finding the right way forward to ensure maximum protection for the vulnerable sector, but also maximum protection of their physical and mental well-being.
Mr. Sapali, a question for you. If you today were the Chief Minister, what would you have done anything different during the course of this COVID emergency, bearing in mind that under normal parliamentary circumstances, I'm going to go back to that very, very briefly, this would have been a debate in Parliament, and we all would have heard, what everybody felt really, and I'm not talking about Punch and Judy politics. I'm talking about politics. Forget the Punch and Judy bit for now. But what would you have done differently? I mean, I don't want to list, just one or two examples that what would have set you apart from what has been decided now. Obviously, you would have done the same as Mr. Picardo. You would have invited him. So I'd probably ask him that question as well.
So Leo, yes, obviously, if the GST had won the election, I was Chief Minister, would I have done some things differently? The answer to that is yes. Inevitably, we would have done certain things differently, because in evaluating particular decisions, we might have reached different conclusions with different emphasis. I don't think it's particularly helpful today, when we are trying to find a common way forward, to focus on differences of approach that I or my colleagues would have taken. if we were the government and the party that Fabian leads were in the opposition. So I'm not going to do that, although, of course, I have said, and I said recently in my interview for Viewpoint, that we may disagree with the government on some approach on a number of issues, and I gave the example there, I think, about testing, and originally, and we might disagree on some economic measures, but that I certainly don't think it's helpful to focus on what things we might have done differently, because we're trying to find a common way forward. What I do agree I would have done the same, which is where I probably end my answer, is that I would certainly have invited the leader of the opposition to work with us if it hadn't been me, and the roles were reversed on an issue as important as this. And I think that's clear from everything that I have said, not just on this issue, but on many other issues.
Thank you. Well, I don't think it's a question I can meaningfully contribute to, other than to say that I hope that different people do things in different ways, but I would have thought that the objective would have been the same one, whoever was Chief Minister of Gibraltar, which is to keep the number of Gibraltarian deaths to as close to zero as possible. And in that respect, at this moment,